basics of fault tolerance, and I'll add by myself in the context of Liferay DevOps training. What is fault tolerance? We want to go through the mechanics or through the setup that we're going to build within this training. If you have a fault-tolerant system, you typically have a fault-tolerant database, fault-tolerant Liferay DXP installation. Your backend should be fault-tolerant. Your web layer should be well scalable, tolerant. Your load balancers, your firewall, in the end, your uplink. Everything should be somewhat tolerant to failure. However, we still only have one notebook with every single person here, so we'll have a single point of failure anyways. And this is Liferay DevOps training. This is not your load balancer DevOps training, which means we're going to limit ourselves to just deploy Liferay twice, and all of the others will be a single point of failure. We'll have one load balancer, one database, and we're going to discuss what's required here. So on all of these different layers, yes, you want to have a nice system, but we only will cluster Liferay DXP. Why do we cluster? Well, there are two reasons. One is to actually be fault tolerant, to have a failure tolerant system. When one server goes down, the other one keeps the service up. Might be hardware failure, might be any kind of failure, might be just maintenance. You want to shut down one server, the other one should keep up the traffic. That's number one. The second is you have a lot of traffic, more traffic than one server can handle, or can handle in the speed with the performance that you demand for your system. So you might want to add a second, third, fourth, fifth. And our measures have shown that Liferay scales quite well, quite linearly. In just adding another server, you will add another, you duplicate the available load that Liferay can handle with a second server, and then you'll add the same capacity roughly with a third. Those two, actually you can combine them. If you need two servers to withstand your load, to serve your standard load, you can as well configure 3 server cluster, a 4 or a 5 server cluster, because now you'll need fault tolerance on top of the load distribution between two systems. What do we need to take care of? Liferay clustering means you'll have multiple redundant instances of a web application, that is Liferay, on different application servers, naturally on different machines, and in this training we'll have them all on the same machine. However, you'll need all nodes to be able to communicate, as it says here, correctly with a cache, the index, and the document store. The cache is something that Liferay has within each application server, so we don't really need to take care of that, but there is still something that Liferay needs to be aware of. Because if one of your cluster machine changes anything, any document, and you still have it cached, you want to see the updates cluster-wide. And that's why the cache is in here, even though the cache is already well distributed between each application server. Then the index. This is the full text index. This is Elasticsearch. We didn't mention it so far with our setup, but the only supported infrastructure, the only supported configuration for Liferay is that you should run within an external Elasticsearch search server. However, when you just start, like we did so far, there will only be an embedded Elasticsearch server. That is a working configuration, but it's not supported. If you run into any issues that need some specific tuning for Elasticsearch or for Liferay, Liferay support will tell you, well, run an external Elasticsearch. And that's the supported way. Why? Because tuning Liferay means something completely different than tuning Elasticsearch. They both have different options that are required. And then we have the document store. I've told you documents are stored in the file system store, advanced file system store, or they can be in the document library, in the database or anywhere else, but by default they're in a file system. Which means all of the cluster machines must access the same file system, or you gotta configure them to access the same repository. It wouldn't work if two servers would each store their own document library, because then both would have half of your document library. And that's not fault tolerant. If one goes away, half of your document library goes away. Probably not what you expect. A couple of words here about fault tolerance. Whenever I take my mouth full of this word, which is hard to pronounce with a German tongue, then what am I talking about in fault tolerance? User load spikes, scheduled maintenance. If you want to take a server down to upgrade it, to exchange a disk or memory for emergency maintenance, hardware failure, unexpected system shutdowns, or an unwanted system intrusion. So if you really want to see what happened here, you'll take a server offline and you might need another server to continue to run. And that should be it for the introduction. Now, next chapter, we're going to discuss the business continuity aspects. What else do we have within this clustering exercise? It's another lecture.